Downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program of public issues and interests. The only program on broadcast TV where there's extensive, long interviews of citizens about interests and issues that face our community. Tonight's special guest is Paul Osborne, Mayor. I'll always think of Paul Osborne as the Mayor of Decatur, and he's with us tonight to talk about his career in media and issues in our community. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Bill.
You know, one of the focuses of our program, Paul, the Faber Files, is to have local media so we can really spotlight local interests. And you've been doing local media for decades here.
Since I was a kid. It seems like it. No, this actually is this year, in fact, just a week earlier, marked 50 years since I started in business, and I was already doing some media with WDC when I was a teenager. So it's kind of been a lifetime commitment to this community and covering what's happening in this community, and as an alternative outlet with the Tribune, which is almost 50 years old. And so I really believe strongly that there's a lot of stories to get out there that would not be heard unless it was because of a show like yours or the Decatur Tribune, or we deal at a local level in a way that I think others do not.
What brought you into media, into the newspaper business, Paul?
I think it's the religious background. When I was getting started out, I planned on being an evangelist, and certainly had a lot of support from the church. And they sponsored a radio program, Thoughts for Today, on WDC. So I wrote it and I hosted it, and it was a weekly program, and also started putting out a Christian newsletter. And so it kind of evolved from that certainly active in my church and speaking around Central Illinois. But Decatur really was the place where I found my heart here in Decatur. And it just kind of evolved from that, and the idea that you can write something or say something, and whether it's your opinion or it's a straight news story, and other people will read that. I've always found that fascinating. They may agree or disagree with you, but there's a communication there that you have at the local level that you don't get with national networks and huge news organizations.
I know, for example, at the newsstand, people are anxious for the arrival of the delivery of your paper. The guy will say, well, it's coming in at 3 o'clock or something like that. They're actually waiting for the new edition of the Decatur Tribune.
Well, it's very gratifying because we have people, if for some reason, if the paper doesn't arrive on Thursday, those who take it by mail, they'll call up and say, you put out a paper this week? Where's my paper? I look forward to getting it every Thursday. And we mail all of them out Wednesday, and then on the newsstand, too. We have newsstand distribution on Wednesday, and I guess it makes me feel good to know that they look forward to reading the Tribune each week.
You know, there's so much controversy out there, and people can't decide who's telling the right story, but it seems that in our community, you are a trusted voice. That's why people are anxious for your copy of the Tribune, because they want to know what Paul Osborne has to say on the issue.
Oh, I appreciate that comment, very much, and I take that seriously. I really do, and to me, it's never a question of whether the person's a Democrat or Republican. I think you need to make news judgments or editorial opinion on people and how they relate to the community. Are they good for the community or good for the district? Is this something that's good for Decatur? And certainly it's what I tried to do when I served as mayor those years, that it's not really about me or it's not about somebody else, it's about the community itself. Is this good for Decatur?
Sure. And
certainly it's good for the community, and labor was a part of making that good. I'm fine with that. If there was another direction to go, the bottom line is it's not about me winning favor with certain individuals. It's about, I represent the whole community.
Yes.
And I try to also have that, in the newspaper. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican or an office holder or a challenger, the paper is accessible to you. If you disagree with me, and when I was mayor, I had people disagree with me. I printed their letters to my paper, and they disagreed with me. To me, if everything I do is based on what I think, then you don't really have that open discussion that you need.
Sure. It's like at the family dinner table. Dad's got to let mom and the kids all have their say if the family's going to function well.
Well, and I certainly appreciate opposing opinions, because I think it makes the paper more interesting, and it challenges me to look even more thoroughly on issues the next time. But we usually have a pretty good letters to the editor section, and that's very gratifying because people know if they send the letter in, if they disagree with me, it's still going to be in.
Yeah. You know, Paul, you probably recall this, but President Kennedy in his cabinet meetings always encouraged dissent and counter opinions because he wanted to know what the other side was of the story. Whereas President Lyndon Johnson, he didn't want to have knowledge of the other side.
Yeah, and I think it's really important in our leaders. And, you know, I think for a leader to have just yes people around him, that doesn't serve the leader, and it certainly doesn't serve the country or the community. And I certainly always made my judgments, and as mayor, and certainly you know, as a newspaper editor and publisher, based on hearing all sides. And I know when I ran for mayor, that was the one promise that I made, the only one, that I'll always be willing to listen to you. And I think that's about the only commitment we should make to people, and not make long-term commitments, I will do this or that, because I think you tie yourself into a corner, and it's unfair to other people when you do that. And I feel the same way about you know, the Decatur Tribune, which is kind of like a member of my family. It's just a part of me. It kind of expresses who I am in the way I handle the editorials and the input. But you know, I just don't want to hear from people who agree with me. And I also want to hear the other side, and I learn from that too.
Now, it was remarkable in your first candidacy for mayor, the Chamber of Commerce actually didn't back you, and you had such a good run as mayor, and here was the Chamber of Commerce, perhaps the most influential group in our community, not backing Paul Osborne. They had another candidate they wanted in.
Yeah, that's right, and I guess, you know, they had a right to choose whatever person, you know, they wanted to. I've been a member of the Chamber for many, many years. Labor certainly supported me and stepped up for me, and I've always appreciated that. And I know some like Bobby Mann got out and put out all those signs, and he wasn't even feeling well at the time. And I'll never forget that. I mean, it's not that you seek revenge on anyone, but you remember the good things that were done to you during a difficult time when you're running, and friends step up, and you appreciate that. You know, and I also appreciate that in the Tribune when we get notes and people say, just love your paper, you know, keep it up, you know, hope you can go on forever. That's not going to happen, but it's just like a pat on the back, and I think we should treat everybody that way. And if you didn't agree with me, or if you supported the other candidate once the election is over, you know, I'm okay with you coming in and talking to me. I wish you would. And we need to not get even with somebody, you know. We just need to say, you know, in my heart, it's all even now. You know, campaign's over.
Well, you are a real grassroots guy. You really have the support of the community from the ground up, from the bricklayer to the CEOs are listening to your voice. Well,
I don't know. Can I make you my PR guy? You're doing a great job. You know, and I say I take the responsibility of being an honest journalist and just an honest person. You know, I'm not perfect, obviously, make mistakes, and at times you hurt people's feelings, and you don't really intend to. There are candidates that you may not endorse. It doesn't mean I don't like them, and they're always welcome in my office. It just means I think maybe someone else could do a better job for the community. And I think sometimes people take that very personally, that, you know, if you didn't endorse my dad or my mom, then I don't like you anymore. Well, you know, I like your mom and your dad. It's just you make a choice based on what you feel is good for the district or for the community or the greater sense, the country. And that's kind of how I try to live my life, and I think it's, you know, that way you don't have to remember everything you said. You just say what you feel is right at the time. And I see a lot of that going away, particularly in the media today. That it's about ratings, and it's about, you know, getting a story regardless if you have all the facts, and making judgments, and people making judgments that maybe have lived in the community for 6 months and they don't really know the background of a lot of these things. And that's certainly, having the media background helped me in hitting the track running when I was mayor, because I'd covered all these issues for years, and I remember the city manager telling me, and he's trying to explain something, he says, you probably already know about this, don't you? I wrote about it last year. So some people say, well, media people should not be involved in politics or running for office. Well, if you've been doing your homework and you live in a community, you have a lot of knowledge of that office, you know, going in. You know, talk about community media. I think our audience doesn't really understand the full picture of the ownership of some of our media, that
is local, but is really not local. They pretend to be local. For example, Lee Enterprises, which has a lot of nice people working here in Decatur, but they're in Iowa and they own lots of newspapers, and their commitment is to making the profit and to their shareholders. It is not to the city and the people of Decatur.
Yeah, I think it's important too. To me, I've had opportunities to maybe sell part of the paper because somebody wanted to be involved. And I thought, we start from scratch, like now 50 years ago, and I take a great deal of pride in the paper itself, and I want to know that when I put something in the paper, no one can stop me from putting that in the paper. And I think sometimes we get a little watered down in ownership, where you do this because it'll make you a profit or more of a profit, instead of, is this about the community?
Sure.
And certainly there are articles in the paper I'm sure that people would disagree with, but the motivation has always been, I own the paper, I take that responsibility seriously,
Sure.
but I'm going to make sure that the paper kind of conducts itself like I try to conduct my own life. Be fair to everybody.
Sure. It's very important to have a local community outlet in media, newspaper and broadcast. Another example is the Newhoff Media Center, their WSOY, et cetera. They tell us that they're local media, but they're really not local media. The owner, who sadly passed away a couple years ago, well, he had a home in Jupiter, Florida. That's where he lived, and his summer home was in Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard. I don't call that local media sponsorship.
Well, it's definitely not locally owned,
Right.
that's for sure. I'm certainly on the WSOY Buyers and Company
Yes.
show once a week. I will say I think there are people that work there, and Brian Byers is one of them, that do a lot of good in the community itself, with the food drive and things like
Absolutely.
that. So I think in some cases, the ownership itself is not here to do those things, but you do have some people, not only at this station, but other stations, who take it upon themselves. I've lived here all my life,
Sure.
and these are good things that we should
Sure.
be doing, so I always appreciate that.
But I just think it would be so much stronger and vital to our community if, for example, Brian Byers was the owner of WSOY and would have the freedom to broadcast what he needed to broadcast throughout our community, and not have to be looking at the boss in Edgartown, Massachusetts, or wherever.
Yeah, I think that was the way it used to be in Decatur. And Lindsay Shaw, those people were from Decatur. The owners
Yes.
were in Decatur. They owned the Herald Review, and then later WSOY
Right.
was a part of that, but still they were local people. So there is a missing link there.
Yes.
And as hard as you try to make up for that, and you can do a lot of great things, still when you're not the owner, there is, you're confined to a certain extent.
Confined.
And some react to that better than others do, and some realize their job is on the line if they step over the line, and others just say, this is what I feel in my heart I need to do for the community.
Sure. In terms of the mechanics of running a newspaper, I mean, you're the publisher, the editor, the writer. How do you handle and wear all those hats?
Well, it's actually a little easier now because of the technology. When I started, we had all the old drawing boards and that, and we had a lot more people too. We had a dark room that we had to go in and develop the film and do the film strips and a lot of that. And, did all the addressing with those Speedomat metal plates. We had to pound all those things out. So I look back, I don't know how I ever got the paper out, but the technology has helped a lot. Well, we don't have the drawing boards or the traditional newspaper equipment anymore, which I kind of miss hearing that run in the office. Everything is digital now, and so instead of laying it out on paper, you're laying it out on a screen. And instead of going into the dark room and spending all Saturday morning in the dark room, you take a digital photo and just put it directly basically into the paper. So within 30 seconds, you can take a photo and have it in the paper.
Wow.
The old way, it was a much longer process. And I like this way a lot better. There's a lot of romance connected to the old,
Sure.
the old press and that kind of thing. But that's the reason too, I think you can branch out. And unfortunately, these are the days probably I enjoy the paper the most, because you have a history with it for so long. And then you also realize there are a lot of things you can just do mechanically or on a digital basis that you couldn't do before. And that's a lot of fun. It kind of just opens up all kinds of avenues for you.
What's your typical day like, Paul, in operating your newspaper and writing for your newspaper and covering the lives and the stories of Decatur?
It's a pretty long day, and you'd think after all these years I could, and all the technology, I could make shorter days out of it, but it usually starts at 4:30 or 5 in the morning.
Wow.
I can get a lot accomplished before anybody gets there. I mean, no one's coming in for an interview at 5 o'clock in the morning, so by 9, I really have a big boost, do a lot of the writing early in the morning before anyone gets there. And then we have candidates coming in for interviews, and certainly making choices on what's going to be in the paper that week, what's going to be on the front page. I really check a lot of the information going on around me and keep there's so much anymore, and a lot of it is questionable. The people that write things, and I know this for a fact. Well, usually it's not a fact. It's kind of their opinion. So it's a matter of sorting all that out, and at the end of the day, I know where I need to be for that week's paper. I should be, have this many pages done, or should be at this point. I've got more interviews tomorrow, so I guess even in my mind, I'm creating that paper, and then even before that one goes to press, we're starting on the next one too, so we won't fall behind. But people pick that up. We run 32 pages a week. You cut that into book size, you're almost doing a book a week.
Wow.
And on different subjects, and then you have the advertising and everything else to incorporate. But after all these, I love it. There's just something, starting out with 32 pages that are blank and creating that paper for that week. It's just kind of magic to me. It still is.
And so many people are looking at your photographs of the history of our community. How do you select the photograph for the week?
I don't know. A lot of it, something will come up. If it's water or dredging or something, and I think if the city council's dealing with it, I think maybe we should look at a history of water in this community, and then go back and dig out photos I have of the building of the dam and Lake Decatur, of course, at the same time, and kind of work it in with what's happening now and where we started with all of this years ago. And like now, we're in a month where the railroad explosion happened 40 years ago this month, 1974, which is a national story about Decatur in here. So that's something I've kind of been looking at now for one of the future papers. I took photos there, and so a lot of those over a period of a half century, my own photos I'm going back to.
Wow.
And I used to go to the library and to their history room. And after about 25 or 30 years, I was finding my own articles and doing research, and I was the person I was almost quoting.
Sure.
So, yeah, and that's a very popular feature of the paper, that there are a lot of people that remember a Decatur from 30, 40, 60 years ago. And many of them have moved away, but that's kind of the Decatur they knew.
Yes.
And then they'll write in and say, I have a memory of that.
Sure.
And so it's kind of like hearing living history from these people. And I really enjoy their letters.
You're really documenting the history and the lives of the people of our community. And sometimes, Paul, we feel we're doing that on the Faber Files, for example, if we're covering the Worker Memorial Service, or we're covering an old-time ball game with the people playing. We're making a record of the people and their stories.
That's right, and it's important to have that record. And I've always felt, to find out where you're going, you have to remember where you've been. You don't have to relearn those lessons again. That if this didn't work and the reason why it didn't work years ago, let's try something new this time. But I've always been a history buff, and the history of Decatur in this area is so rich. And there's this material, you just never run out of things to write about, and old photos. And those old photos, a lot of those are brought in by family members, sons or daughters and grandchildren of people who are in those photos from 100 years ago.
Right.
So, and it's kind of a connection for them. And it's kind of like a letter from home, or a letter from the past, when they see their dad's name and their grandfather's name in there.
Yes. Just to talk about another media outlet, and that's WAND-TV. They're trying to cover the Springfield market with stories, the Champaign market with stories, but the sense I get is the people in Decatur want Decatur stories. So in a way, it seems like WAND is in a way not properly, or they are in fact maybe misserving our community, because there's so much going on here that needs coverage.
Yeah, I think, and probably, I don't know, maybe Champaign is criticized too. You would think you'd see more coverage in the city where the station is located, but I guess they consider the Springfield, Champaign, Decatur market all as one. But, but I look at that, and as busy as I am, as long as I work, you know, don't get to see television a lot or television news, but from the comments I've heard, you know, you hear comments like, I need to tune in Champaign in order to find out what's going on in Decatur.
Yes.
And there have been a few times I've looked for a story locally, and it wasn't even part of the mix. And that's, maybe there's something that they have to do in giving equal time because of the market. I really don't know. But I think it just makes it more important that those of us who are really committed to the local scene keep getting the word out and the message out.
Well, I think the viewers don't realize that WA&D is owned by a corporation out of Toledo, Ohio, that owns a bunch of other stations and newspapers. So their commitment is not to the community; it's to their shareholders or their bosses.
Yeah, I find that a disturbing trend from the standpoint too that you're getting into banks. Many of the banks, it's the same thing. If a bank can walk away from you, and if you call for some information about your account, you go to Champaign or Minneapolis or something. And I had one such call. The person told me, "Well, I think we have a branch somewhere." I said, "Well, there's one a block away from me. Can I go there?"
Right.
And it's just like you've lost that closeness, you know. And not only, and there's some exceptions.
Sure.
But as a general rule, the banks I knew who believed in me when I started in business, those people, many of those bankers, have to go somewhere else to make a judgment on me whether I'm worthy of a loan and that. And I think that's a little disturbing these days.
You know, speaking of broadcast TV, I recall a news program that you hosted and delivered news. Is that correct?
Yeah, Newsline. We did it at 5:30 every weekday for almost 10 years on WFHL. And that was a lot like the Decatur Tribune, in that I did both of them at the same time. And that's the kind of thing that I think local media and tying into local media, those are things we couldn't have done, say, 40 years ago. But now, in your case here and others, you have the equipment, you know, you have the means to get the story out in so many different ways. So it's a shame that those so many ways are available and very few are taken advantage of.
Yes. Why do you think that is, Paul? Why do you think there is an absence of genuine local media?
I don't know, and maybe it's just how people view everything now with Facebook and everything else anymore. It's almost like the only people they want to talk to or hear from are maybe family members or friends, you know, or that. And maybe it's so watered down that it's hard to get someone to focus just on the local stories and the stories that aren't told. And I think that there's also a danger there that so much misinformation is getting out. I mean, you can write to a lot of blogs anonymously. You can say anything about the character of anyone else that you want to, apparently make any kind of statement, and you're not even held responsible for it. We have to know your name before we'll print a letter. And, you know, if you're going to say these things, you can ask us to withhold your name, and we will, but we have to know who's writing this. And I just think it's very unfair in this media that we have today, in social media, that you can be anybody writing anything. You can be the adversary of another candidate and use a name anonymously, and then run down the other candidate. And do that as many times with as many different people as you want. And I think somewhere along the line that'll probably come to an end with a lawsuit or something that'll put a chilling effect on that. But right now it's just so wide open that you know, I'm concerned about that. I think there needs to be, you have a right to state your opinion, but there needs to be some responsibility. And you just can't call people names and then disappear into the woodwork. And you're not even known.
You know, I'm not sure which of our founding fathers said this, but he said that we could do without Congress, but we cannot do without a good newspaper.
Well, yeah, well, I like the person who ever said that. And that is true. And I think when you consider the role of a newspaper, and even extending that into other media today, the role that you play is there are people in government, there are people you know, running your country, representing you, that many times don't want you to talk to them because, as one person told me, one officer, "You make me look stupid." Well, I just quoted what the person said, but it was my fault. And I think they're nervous around that. But you know, it's the newspaper. It's not my newspaper necessarily, but all newspapers. That's really what's kind of been the bedrock of information over the years, that the stories are more extensive than you find in a 2-minute clip
Sure.
on television. And when it's the newspaper, they should be digging hard.
Mhm.
That here is what a city council or or a county board or someone gives you, saying this is what we
Yeah, they
did,
do.
but you want to find out what they really did.
Paul Osborne, we're out of time. It went so fast. Thank
Yeah.
you for joining us on the Favor Files.